Are you currently taking yourself to a project through building control? Then this is the episode that you need to stay tuned into. In the last episode, I said I would outline the typical phases that a private building control inspector would inspect. It's important to note that not all of these may be applicable to your specific project, but this will just give you a general idea of what to expect. So let's dive into it. Excavation for foundations. So the building control inspector should be called out when the excavation for foundations begins to ensure that the depth and width of the trench are suitable for the proposed building and that the soil conditions are adequate for bearing the weight of the structure. They'll also check that any necessary drainage or reinforcement has been installed before the concrete is poured. Drainage. The building control inspector should be called out during the installation of drainage systems to ensure that the correct materials and methods are being used and that the system is appropriately connected to the main drainage system. They will also check that the system is designed to cope with the expected rainfall and that any necessary backflow prevention devices are installed. In our project, we'll need a soakaway, I think 2, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. Damp-proof course membrane. The building control inspector should be called out when the damp-proof course or membrane is being installed to ensure that it is located correctly and that there are no gaps or tears that could allow the water to enter the building. They will also check that the damp-proof course membrane is appropriately linked with the damp-proofing of other elements of the building, such as the cavity walls. Wall cavity. The building control inspector should be called out when the cavity walls are being constructed to ensure that they are built to the correct width and that the cavity is appropriately ventilated. They will also check that any insulation or any other materials being used are suitable for the location and that they are installed correctly. Structural features. The building control inspector should be called out to check the structural features of the building, including steelwork, concrete reinforcement, and the positioning and fixing of beams and lintels. They'll also check that any temporary supports used during the construction are removed once the permanent structure is in place. Fire stopping. The building control inspector should be called out when the fire stopping measures are being installed to ensure that they comply with the relevant fire safety regulations. They will check that the fire-resistant materials are being used correctly and that any gaps or openings in the structure are appropriately sealed to prevent the spread of fire. So, kind of an important one, that one. Acoustic features. The building control inspector should be called out when the acoustic features of the building are being installed to ensure that they meet the required standards for noise, insulation, and sound reduction. They will check that the materials being used are suitable for the location and that they are correctly installed to provide the desired acoustic performance. Accessibility features. The building control inspector should be called out when the accessibility features of the building are being installed to ensure that they comply with the relevant disability access regulations, subject to them applying to your development. They will check that the features such as ramps, handrails, and door widths meet the required standards and that they are appropriately located and installed. And then finally, we've got occupation and completion. The building control inspector should be called out when the building is nearing completion to carry out the final inspection and issue a completion certificate. They will check that all work has been carried out to the required standards and that the building is safe and suitable for occupation. And then Bob's your uncle, you're done.
Your private building inspector, just make sure that you're aligned with the latest building regulations and will give you feedback. So here's an example of some of the feedback that we received. I'm not going to share it all, I'll just show you a few points to show some of the things that you need to address for which you would never have identified at this stage unless you had some expertise in the area. So some of this stuff is just bog standard. So the structural design and calculation provided have been sent to our third-party engineers. Any deviation from these will need to be discussed prior to implementation. That's just common sense. Stuff like, some of the elements from a fire local authority perspective may need amendments or changes. So they say here, look, your current proposal does not comply to approved document B with an open plan arrangement. To accord with Part B, and protected stair is provided comprising of 30 minutes fire resisting enclosures and access via an FD20 fire rated door to all accommodation storage spaces that communicates with the stairs directly. Alternatively, supply details of the sprinkler mist system. I ain't got a clue what any of that means, but the architect does, and it's essentially going through this document, working out from a cost perspective what's best to do, whether it's best to make the changes that will cost you more money, but maybe quicker to do, or it may be, in order to reduce the spend, change a design which may have a material impact to your drawings, etc. You just got to work closely with your architect, potentially your structural engineer as well, to go through this list and just mitigate all elements, because without mitigating all these elements, you're not going to get your sign-off from building control. Another example is, please provide a site investigation report to demonstrate there are no contamination risks present. Something we didn't do, so that's going to need to be done. Another one, please provide a water efficiency calculation as required by Part G. Please confirm provision of wholesome water. Again, God knows what that means, but yeah, Mr. Architect, need your help, please. And they also call it out here, look, your proposal is subject to a public sewer build-over agreement. However, drawings indicate internal manholes retained, which is not permitted under the received agreement. Please amend. So, as I say, this is something we're going to be discussing. Well, we have discussed, and we have got our approval with Thames Water for how we're going to, approach the drainage situation. All Thames Water care about are their manholes and their public sewers, because if there's a problem and they need to come and rod it, and you've moved something where it's not supposed to have been moved to, you can get in big trouble for that. So you need to make sure that whoever your local water authority is, they're involved in the process. I would assume building a house, right? I was doing a structure of this size. Again, it's case by case, but in our case, we got a private manhole and we've got a public manhole. So Thames were involved. We've got our agreement sorted, and as I said, I'll do a separate video on it because it's quite interesting just to understand how that works as well for those that aren't aware. But yeah, this kind of just summarizing to give you an overview of all the bits and pieces you've just got to tidy up and make sure from a compliance perspective, and make sure we get signed off from our third party building control. And it's also worth bearing in mind that not everything on the list is going to stop you starting physical work on the ground. Although obviously, depending on where you are with your project and what you're trying to achieve, it may. For example, if you need to address something severely with regards to drainage and you already finished your drainage, then yeah, you're going to have to probably undo work, which is just again going to be time consuming and cost you money. So, it's good to get an understanding, and this is what we're doing, is trying to understand exactly what are blockers to us starting the work. And as I say, we're working with the architect, structural engineer, and working with everyone essentially to understand the best process to do this build ready for the summer. So for our project, I don't believe there's anything that stops us actually starting work apart from party board agreements, which again I'll discuss in another episode. But yeah, it just essentially means that your neighbours are aware, giving your neighbours notice that you're ready to start working, and you're going to be making lots of noise between X time and Y time. You're going to be doing these changes. You may be touching the boundary wall, which may impact them, and there's things you can put in place to mitigate any potential structural issues to their properties to reduce your risk profile. So there you have it. That's building control. That's everything I can think of that we've gone through. So as I mentioned, at the moment, where we are right now is we've got our building control report back, and we're working with the architect, and we're working with structural engineer to make sure that we're all aligned in relation to what can start first, and whether we can push things forward without having to close off some of the items. So we can kind of close them out in parallel. Some of those, the compliance checklists that we just looked at, make sure those we're adhering to building regulations. So yeah, that about sums up building control, in a short summary type of way. And yeah, if you've got any questions, comment below as normal. And on the next episode, I'm going to be probably talking about Thames Water and sorting out that build over agreement. We're trying to build a movement here, people. So make sure you like and subscribe below. And yeah, I'll see you on the next episode. Come on, let's do this, baby.